Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am especially delighted to introduce my guest today, Steve Zuckerman. Steve is an experienced executive who has held leadership positions in both nonprofit and for-profit organizations. He is Debra Meyerson's husband since 1988, care partner since her stroke in 2010, and an unnamed co-author of Identity Theft, Rediscovering Ourselves After Stroke, and co-author of the book's second edition, which is due out in October of 2025. In 2019, he scaled back other leadership roles to co-found Stroke Onward with his wife, Debra. In addition to his role on the board, Steve's significant volunteer commitment to Stroke Onward focuses on organizational strategy, fundraising, and governance. In 2006, Steve launched a California presence for Self-Help, a nationally recognized economic justice nonprofit based in Durham, North Carolina. In 2008, he co-founded Self-Help Federal Credit Union, where he continues to serve part-time as president and senior advisor to Self-Help's West Coast operations. His first career involved 14 years with a private equity firm where he was a managing director. Throughout his career, Steve has served on numerous nonprofit boards supporting economic, social, and health justice, including the Tides Foundation, Positive Coaching Alliance, and Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center. He currently serves on the BU Sargent Clinical Advisory Board and the ACT for Aphasia Stakeholder Advisory Board through the University of Pittsburgh. Steve earned a BA from Yale University and an MBA from the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. And I must add that Steve and I grew up together, and we've known each other for many decades. Please join me in welcoming Steve Zuckerman. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's really fun. So, Steve, as you know, we like to begin at the beginning on Work from the Inside Out. So take us back to those formative years and how they may or may not have informed where you are today.
You know, in many ways, I think I sort of had a wonderful and relatively uneventful childhood in that my parents were great. They stayed together. They raised my sister and me. We were by no means wealthy, but comfortable. In fact, I joke sometimes when I was in business school, I did a kind of a development class where you were supposed to bare your soul and talk about things. And for the first 6 weeks of the class, people were getting down on me because I wasn't disclosing all the great traumas in my life, and my early life didn't have a lot of great trauma. It was a pretty good life. So
Yeah.
I think it informed in that I was loved, I was supported. My parents valued education, and it was sort of kind of something that it was just a foregone conclusion. I would go to college, and so yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it just created a super stable foundation for me that everything else was built on.
Well, I remember it well because I was a witness to a lot of that, given that we went to a lot of the same schools and also attended Sunday school together as well. And, while everything you're saying rings true to me, it was not boring, though. I mean, there were a lot of different things that I recall that either you were involved with or we were both involved with. So, and I certainly remember your sister and your parents very well. And I know that there were just a lot of different things that they were committed to and involved with in the community. And so while it was very supportive and stable, and maybe there was no trauma, it was a very rich and rewarding early part of your life that gave you a lot to work with. And I think that, as evidenced by a lot of the things that you have done over the years, some people would have gone on from private equity and, getting the MBA and just continued on the, let's say the for-profit track. But you've really expanded your career and your view of things over time. And I think some of that genuinely does come from your roots. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my parents were both very focused on service and giving back. My dad was a public school teacher. My mom was a substitute teacher. She at one time worked in the prison system as an inmate counselor. My dad was also a lawyer, and my mom became a lawyer late in life. That's one of the coolest things. I think she went to law school when she was 56 and
Oh,
represented kids in the prison system that needed representation independent of their parents. And so, yeah, I mean, just sort of the idea that we all have a responsibility to give where we can give was very much a part of my upbringing. And we'll get into the career and choices, but I sort of have an unusual track in that I've bounced back and forth between the nonprofit and for-profit sector. It wasn't
yeah,
all of one and then all of another. And it's just always been important to
yeah,
me to be involved in things that I thought were somehow making the world a better place.
yeah,
At the
yeah,
same time, I've had some pretty traditional career-oriented time as well.
yeah, yeah. So let's go forward from there. Although I will say I love hearing about your mom. I didn't realize that your mom had gotten her law degree that farther along in her life. And I've often said to people, it's never too late. And in my book, I actually profiled a cousin of mine who went to law school in her late 40s. And so I tell people all the time, don't ever think it's too late to pursue something you're interested in. So I'm going to add your mother to that list. So that's terrific.
For your next book.
That's right. That's right. So take us forward from there, from your very stable childhood, but interesting childhood. You went off to school, and did you go to grad school right after Yale? I don't recall that, but
Nope, went to work out of college for a consulting firm, Bain and Company up in Boston. It's a
okay.
very large consulting firm now. When I joined back in 1982, date myself, it was a much smaller boutique consulting firm,
Ah,
but spent 2 years there in a program that was very much designed as a 2-year program. It was kind of learn a lot of the people. It was a great first job. A lot of the people who leave that job do go to business school. And actually, that was kind of one of my first big choices is
hmm,
that I kind of had felt like I had gone from one ivory tower to another ivory tower, and I might go to another ivory tower, and that service ethos was kind of burning in me a little bit. And I ended
hmm.
up joining a startup nonprofit. I was employee number 5 that was doing economic justice work,
Oh,
and I just kind of felt like I thought I wanted to go to business school, but I wanted to have a little bit of a different kind of experience first.
hmm.
And I still remember my dad was all worried about that. He was like, "Well, you're on the track, and do you want to take that risk?" And I guess to me, naive as I was like, it doesn't feel like a risk. It feels
No.
like a really good thing to do, and something that would actually help my chances of getting into business school, not hurt them. So
Yeah.
I did that for just a year, and then did apply to business school and was fortunate to get in out at Stanford. And this is jumping forward a little bit,
Yeah.
but sort of our choices kind of inform our future opportunities. It was that same nonprofit that I worked with when I was employee number 5 that I ended up starting a West Coast operation for some 20 years later when it had already grown to about 150 people. So it was a very different organization, but it was the relationships I built in that year that led me back to kind of what I would call my second major career, kind of leading that work for a nonprofit.
Wow. I love the threads that you followed and created. It says a lot. So take us forward from there.
2 years at business school after working for this nonprofit. Business school was just great, kind of expanding time, kind of learning, and I think kind of it's interesting because when I was coming out, I think I learned a lot of lessons as I was coming out of business school. I was pretty convinced I didn't want to do the investment banking thing or the management consulting thing. I wanted to be an operator. And one of the things that, and I can't put a name to it or a book or a course, but something that kind of really stuck with me is kind of know your non-negotiables,
Ah,
and kind of really think about the things you don't want to do,
mm,
and don't spend a lot of your time and energy trying to secure jobs that kind of aren't what you want, but maybe you could convince yourself to do it if you got it. And I ended up leaving business school without a job because I
mm,
was convinced that I wanted to be an operator at a small business.
mm,
And most of the jobs that I was looking for, if they wanted you,
yeah,
they would want you to start right away.
right.
And I had some plans for the summer that I didn't want to forgo.
Mm,
And so I just figured I'd come back and find something. And that
mm,
ended up working out for me in a somewhat unusual way, which I can share if you want. But
sure.
yeah, I actually, it was the very early years of the private equity,
Mm,
kind of the development of the private equity industry.
mm,
And there were like six small private equity firms that came to campus. And
mm,
I had a background that would look really good for them because I had a
mm,
consulting background. Then I worked for
mm,
an investment bank for the summer. But I always asked in the first 30-minute interview, would you be interested in hiring someone who might want to be part of your private equity firm for a couple years, but then go to work in one of your portfolio companies in an
mm,
operating job? And
mm,
in five of the six interviews, it basically led to the interviewer standing up, extending his hand and saying, "Thank you. It was very nice to meet you." And there's the door. And in some ways, it was a pretty lousy interviewing strategy because I kept getting ushered out the door. But in other ways, it was a great one because they didn't want somebody that wanted what I wanted. And
mm,
so it saved me a lot of time going through second round interviews and third round interviews, only to sort of, and the worst part would be to take a job and then realize it just wasn't a good fit.
wow.
And it ended up being one person who said, yes, actually, the fact that you've asked that question, even if you never do it, says you think about the business the way we want to think about the business. And that interview process went on much longer.
Interesting.
And ultimately led to the job I took after business school. So
What I love about what you're talking about, and it's not just about that juncture, but also even the juncture after left the Bain and Company program, that you really took a good look in terms of what made sense for you rather than what all the external normal, sort of pathways were that somebody who had done what you had done so far would do. I mean, you've named them very clearly. And I think a lot of people just would do the investment banking thing, right? Or go into a large consulting firm and be, a pawn on their chessboard for a while until they get burnt out. And my sense is that you just knew you wanted something else. It wasn't even about that you were necessarily saying no to those things in any particular way as much as you had other things you just simply wanted to do.
yeah, and for some people, those jobs are the right fit. For
Mm-hmm.
others, maybe not. Maybe they're doing it because of the path or the prestige, whatever it is. But yeah, no, and I think that's something, and maybe it does go back to my childhood and the confidence that the stability gave me.
Mm-hmm.
As I was coming out of business school, I ended up interviewing. I thought I wanted to go back to the East Coast after
Mm-hmm.
2 years in California, and
Yeah.
I was actually kind of a finalist for a job in the firm I ultimately worked for their New York office.
Oh,
Um, and another sort of just choice was that my relationship with Deb, then my girlfriend, now my wife of more years than I can count, was getting more and more serious, and she was getting a PhD and had another couple of years to go.
ah,
And I, for personal reasons, took myself out of the recruiting process from that firm. And again, just the serendipity of it, I ended up working for one of the founders of that firm in a series of nonprofit jobs for a year after business school because he had a real need. We had developed a really good chemistry in the interviewing process, but their California office was already full.
yeah,
And he said, but we hope to grow. And it may be that a year from now, we have the ability to bring on another person out here. But there are all these nonprofit activities that I've offered to help with that I don't have the capacity. Might you work for a year supporting this portfolio of nonprofits, which I ended up doing for a year. And it was
wow,
very rewarding. And at the
yeah,
end of that year, they were ready to hire. I got a job and ended up working there for 14 years. So
wow.
I sort of was able to, and there were a few more turns in that too, because
Hmm.
Deb's first job out of her graduate school was at University of Michigan.
Ah,
I thought I was going to have to leave the firm to move to Ann Arbor, but they suggested hanging up a shingle in the Midwest. So we had a, one person office for a few years, and then we ultimately decided to move back to California. So again, it was sort of kind of just knowing what was and wasn't going to work for me and not dancing around it, but just
yeah,
being open and honest with the people I was working with. And, I was just lucky enough that it worked out.
yeah. Well, there's something about this lucky enough and the serendipity of it. There's actually been research on that and books written about that. I've actually interviewed a couple of authors and researchers who've studied these things. And there's something about that about just and the way that you're talking about it reminds me of how people just show up in their own lives or show up in the lives of other people they make good connections with and just stay open to what's possible. And it sounds like you made yourself available in ways that felt right to you. It wasn't about being rigid in any particular way, other than to say, here are the things I'm willing to do, capable of doing. I'm flexible this way and that way. And yet, no, I'm not going to go and do this one thing, but not in a way of sounding like, you're closing a door. You were keeping all the windows open at the same time, being just very plain and clear about what you were available for.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the way it sounds.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And um, I sometimes use the phrase strategically opportunistic that,
I love that.
you can have a strategy, you can have a plan. Although one of my favorite new quotes is life is what happens while you're busy making other plans,
Yeah.
which comes out of a song.
Yeah.
Um, but I think having strategies and knowing what you want and having direction is great. But then I try not to stay too rigid to that
Right.
because you never know when something that you didn't think of or didn't plan
Right.
might pop up. But if
Right.
it feels right, it
Right.
it may be the right way to go.
Yeah, and sometimes those things that pop up are unwelcome, and we're going to get to that. And sometimes things that pop up are just a pleasant surprise. And if you're too busy trying to stay the course, so to speak, you might miss something that could be a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agree.
So that sounds really exciting that you were able to really work through those 14 years, change locations, and have that experience of even running the office from another location. I'm sure that afforded you some opportunities you wouldn't have had otherwise. And you moved back to California. I know you and Deb have a family and now you have grandchildren. which I know you're enjoying. That's another new job you have. So take us forward from there. You decided after 14 years to leave the private equity business. I assume, I don't know if you left the business entirely or just that particular firm, but take us forward from there.
No, I did. I mean, I mentioned that initially I wanted to be an operator,
Right.
and I did after the first 4 years with
Mm.
that firm. I ended up taking responsibility for the operations of the firm. So I got out of the investing side of the business,
Ah,
and I did that both because of my interest in running something and also just candidly lifestyle.
mm,
The deal business was jumping on planes at a moment's notice,
yeah.
and my wife was building her academic career. We
Hmm.
had 3 kids. It just didn't work for me to be that unplanned.
Hmm.
But it ended up the firm got to a point where it made sense for me to leave. I never saw myself doing that for my entire life.
Yeah.
Wanted to make a transition. Our kids were then 7, 10, and 13.
Mm,
And we had been living the sort of two-career, full-time, full tilt, lots of daycare. And while that worked well, we were also thinking, kids' problems are getting a little more complicated. It wouldn't be bad for one of us to be around. So I
mm.
like to say I transitioned into my best job ever, which was at-home dad.
Ah,
And I ended up doing that for 4 years. I knew I wanted to do a major career transition, get
yeah.
into something that was more sort of socially motivated,
Mm,
kind of that bounce back into the nonprofit. But felt like I'd be able to think that through better if I got further away from what I had been doing. The kind of the
hmm.
temptation to go back to it would be
Yeah.
less.
Yeah.
And I basically I served on some boards. I did a little bit of consulting, a lot of nonprofit board work.
Mm.
But I like to say I would only take roles that would allow my only deliverables were my kids. I was sort of I had to be able to answer the phone and take care of a problem. I was sort of on call, and it
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
Loved doing it. And it was actually at some point, Deb said to me, you've always said this is just a temporary thing and you're going back to work, but you're loving this so much that if you don't go back to work soon, you may never go back to work. And so then I finally started looking for the next thing.
Uh-huh. Now, I know there was some strategic juncture in the middle of all that where you and Deb took a pause from day-to-day life, bought a sailboat, and took your kids and homeschooled them on the boat and traveled around the world.
Not quite around the world. That's a little more
Okay.
glamorous than it was.
All
But
right.
yeah, this actually had been a dream of Deb's since, I mean, she literally told me about it, when we had barely started dating because she was traveling with her brother a little bit after college and was in Greece and ran into a family. She grew up in a sailing family and she was a
Ah,
sailor and ran into a family that was living on a sailboat with their kids. And she, like, it imprinted in her mind that someday she would love to do that. And I didn't have a sailing background, but was a very willing accomplice.
uh-huh.
And yeah, we sort of were able, Deb was in between two academic appointments.
Ah,
It was actually the very first year of I called it my structural sabbatical.
uh-huh.
And we rented out our home and was able to use that to fund. We originally thought we were going to rent a boat, but we couldn't find one that would work well for us. So we ended up
Yeah.
buying it at the beginning and selling it at the end, but we were
Yeah.
able to fund the trip with by renting our home.
Nice.
And we were in the Mediterranean the whole time, so
Oh,
we didn't
okay.
go around the world. We sailed along the coasts of France, Italy, Greece, and Turkey over a 12-month period, and for about 5 months in the middle during the winter when you could sail, but it wasn't very pleasant. We actually stayed in a harbor town called Gaeta in Italy
Oh.
for about 5 months, and we
Oh,
did some
wow.
travel from there. But we lived
Uh-huh.
on the boat in a
Oh,
harbor. So yeah,
wow.
it was our I like to say that our life up until then was completely driven by schedules and obligations and cruising on a sailboat. The only thing that can really drive your schedule is the weather, and you
Mm,
have absolutely no control over it. So, in many ways, it was sort of the antithesis of life at home, and
mhm.
that was really kind of the goal, was to
Yeah,
just give us and our kids the opportunity to live in a very different
yeah,
way, and
yeah,
it was fantastic.
yeah. Have your kids since then? What year was that, by the way, that you did that?
That was in 2002.
Okay,
And our kids were 7, 10, and 13 when we left, a year older when we got back.
sure.
And they, to varying degrees, they were a bit resistant when we did it. We like to say our oldest was passive aggressive for about 4 months, having yanked him out of his life. But pleased to say that now they all look back on it and thank us for it. They
Oh,
see it
that's
as
nice.
having been a wonderful. We sometimes joke that that trip was going to either turn our kids into couch potatoes or adults with wanderlust,
Uh-huh.
and all three of our kids will jump at any opportunity to go travel and explore. So,
Oh, wow.
fortunately, it went that way.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. I just want to share with the audience that I was probably shortly thereafter, where whenever you got back, I was reading Fast Company magazine, and they had done a feature on your family and your trip. And I read about it and didn't know right away that it was you because the photos didn't really show a good picture of you. And I reached out to your mother to say, was this our Steve? And she told me, yes, it was. And I just thought it was the best thing when I found out about the trip that you had done with your family. And yet I wasn't totally surprised. I thought you were more of a sailor because of the years that our family spent at the Bayway Beach Club
You
in all
know,
those
I,
years.
I I occasionally sailed a sunfish,
Yeah.
but I kind of lived on the tennis court, not in the
Mm.
bay. So
Mm-hmm.
I could not claim any sailing prowess. It's interesting because the author of that article is somebody who had written about my wife's academic work
Oh,
and knew about the trip, and I think we turned him down like 4 or 5 times because we just it wasn't a trip we were doing to kind of get written about. It was a trip we were
yeah,
doing for ourselves. And the thing that finally convinced my wife to let him do it was he said, and I share this because it's so related to the work you do.
yeah,
He said there are, one, it's an absolute privilege, and we know that, to be
sure.
able to do it, for the things to line up to be able to do something like that.
Yeah,
But for every 1,000 people for whom that is true,
yeah,
999 of them find all the reasons why not to do
that's
it.
right.
And it really is something. And we certainly had so many discussions about all the reasons it didn't make sense for us to do it.
Yep.
But ultimately it was just sort of taking that leap to say, yeah, but we can and we'd like to. And so all
Hmm.
these reasons aren't reasons not to do it. And
Right.
he said that if the article leads some number of people to see through their reasons not to do some kind of an adventure,
Right.
then you're doing some good for other people by letting
Yeah.
us write the article. And
Right.
in fact, we did have, over the years, we've had probably half a dozen people find us, track us down, and say, that article is what got my family and I to make the leap and go do it. So that's
Hmm.
that's that's kind of a fun thing to think that somehow letting them write that article, kind of encourage some other people to take exciting adventures for them.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be as big a leap as you took, right? I think there are other things that people could stop, to use that as an example and say, well, what is something that we might want to do as a family, or change things up, or put a pause on the kind of scheduled lives that we live to, break things up and change the perspective a little bit. So I think those things can really make a difference. And so I think there's lots of ways that a story like that can really have an impact on people. And the other thing I wanted to make a note of is the name of the boat that you took. Did you name the boat?
Yeah, it was Now or Not,
I love that.
strung together.
Yeah.
And actually, the story where that came from was once when our daughter was about 3 years old. Deb was wrestling with her after dinner because she was distracted and didn't want to finish eating and didn't want to have dessert and was getting all kinds of, trying to do everything else. And Deb was like, "Okay, Sarah, it's dessert time, now or never." And Sarah just kind of looked up at Deb with a puzzled look on her face and said, "Mommy, it's not really now or never. It's just now or not." Because it's like, I'm going to have dessert again sometime. It's just not now. And we just thought that was such a great phrase.
Yeah.
And it happened to work because when we first envisioned doing this trip, we pretty much created about a 3-year window that we thought it was reasonable to yank the kids out of their lives. It was when our youngest was old enough to be a participant, not an infant along for the ride.
Right.
And we really felt like we wanted to do it before our oldest got into high school. And we ended up hitting the last of those 3 years. And
Mm.
so for us, the trip was now or not, like not
Right.
now or never. We'd go
Right.
sailing again.
Yeah.
So anyway, and that is actually, I bought the URL and my email address has been steve@nowornot.com ever since.
I
So
love it. That's terrific. It's a great, it's also a great, I think, a great way to look at life in many ways. Not that you have to do everything immediately, but at the same time, it's a great way to think about things. I certainly subscribe to it. That really struck me when I read the article, because I think the article showed a picture, I think, of the boat and the name of the boat. I
Mhm.
think that's where I got it. So, as much as I don't want to leave your boat trip, let's go forward from there. So you came
Uh,
back from that trip and back to the scheduling of life and all of that.
That's right. And my schedule, whereas the weather drove my schedule for a year, the kids drove my schedule for the next 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And I was, as I said, in the best job I ever had. And then Deb appropriately pointed out that I was enjoying that a lot and I better think about what I wanted to do next. And
Yeah.
really just started exploring, sort of doing a lot of the work that you encourage your clients to do, saying, what do I want to do? What's important? What are my
Yeah.
needs? What are my goals? And I was looking at everything from, I knew I wanted to do something that was sort of in some way, shape, or form, I thought helping to make the world a better place.
Yep.
And my background was in business. So I sort of figured it should somehow build on that. And I explored philanthropy. I explored starting a mission-driven company. I
Mm-hmm.
explored, all kinds of different things. And then I kind of foreshadowed this, got talking with the co-founder and CEO of the nonprofit who had become and remained a very, very close friend. And we got talking about the state of his nonprofit. And for reasons I won't go into, that
Yeah.
having some activity on the West Coast would be a good thing for them. And
Mm-hmm.
I ended up first joining the board, then agreeing to do a free consulting project, and then joining the staff to start something for them on the West Coast. And that was 2006 when I finally joined the staff and really did that full time, full tilt, and built. We ended up with 250, 300 people on the West Coast and 20 locations providing financial services in underserved communities. The organization is called Self Help, and we
Right.
started a a self-help credit union in 2008. And that
Mm-hmm.
was the bulk of our activity on the West Coast was building the credit union. So it
Mm-hmm.
was, it was great. I finally became that operator that I thought I wanted to be right out of business
Mm-hmm.
school, but in a nonprofit context. It was a great run. It was work that was, and to some extent still is. I'm still very part-time with that organization,
Yeah.
but just super meaningful work and great organization, and loved it, and was really full-time there till about 2019,
Mm-hmm.
2020. So about 5 years ago was when I
Mm-hmm.
started winding out
Mm-hmm.
of my leadership role there.
Mm-hmm. So take us through that when you started to wind out.
Yeah, so it was 2010 when Deb had her stroke,
Ah,
and I was 4 years into building that, and fortunately, I was able to work in a flexible way enough to be able to support Deb through what she needed, but also continue to work at self-help and lead the organization that we were building.
oh, okay.
And then really the first choice point, and again, given the work you do and the theme of the podcast,
Yeah.
the first choice point came in about 2013. Deb, you know, like everything in her life, she figured we had access to good healthcare. If she worked her tail off, she could get her capabilities back and go back to her job as a professor at Stanford, which is where she was when she had the stroke. And unfortunately, her body, and most specifically, she has a condition called aphasia, which is a communication challenge.
Right.
Thoughts are clear in her head, but she can't find the words. That prevented her from going back to her role as a full-time faculty, and that triggered what we often refer to as her identity crisis. If I'm going to lose the career I've worked so hard for and
Yeah.
the only one I've known, kind of who am I now? And she decided she had done a lot of work. She realized she was having an identity crisis, and she had done a lot of work around identity in her academic career,
Yeah.
and kind of turned that lens on herself and then on other stroke survivors, and decided she wanted to write a book. And I said it was the first choice point because we all knew she would need a lot of help writing the book given the
Yeah.
aphasia.
Sure.
And I really wasn't ready to give up the self-help career yet.
Yeah.
And so that was hard because the easiest thing for her would have been for me to do that because I was in
Mm.
the best position to help her. But I feared that if I gave it up before I wanted to,
Yeah.
that I would get resentful. And, this is a lot of the theme of the work we do now is
Yeah.
when you're supporting someone through a trauma like that,
Yeah.
you certainly need to be willing to change your life some, but if you
Yes,
change it so
sure.
much that you're resentful, you're not going to be a good partner. And so we found other ways. We found somebody we could hire to help her.
Yeah.
I still did on weekends and at nights, but
Yeah.
I was able to continue to work. And the book came out in 2019, Identity Theft: Rediscovering Ourselves After Stroke. And we realized we had struck a chord. A lot of people in the stroke recovery community, there really was nobody talking about this, the importance of rebuilding identity and how you rebuild a quality life in the face of your disabilities, that recovery isn't just rehabilitation.
Right.
And that's when we decided to start a nonprofit that we called Stroke Onward. And by that point, I was then willing to make a change, that it
Mm-hmm.
felt like I had gotten the work at self-help to a point where I was more comfortable passing it on to others,
Mm-hmm.
and that the effort to build a nonprofit around, on the heels of the first edition of the book,
Right.
was sort of going to replace a meaningful job with a meaningful job. And
Yes.
that the time was right for that. So whereas I wasn't willing to make that choice in 2019, oh, sorry, in 2013, I
Right.
was in 2019. So that's when I handed off leadership, went to part-time. As I said, I've sort of whittled it back to more and more part-time, but still
Yeah.
sort of in a senior advisory role, but really more of my effort. And Stroke Onward was never a paid job. Deb and I are both sort of volunteer co-founders and board
Hmm.
members, but that has occupied the bulk of my sort of professional work since
Yeah,
2019, 2020.
I see. And I appreciate you talking so candidly about the decision points and the decision to stay full time with self-help while Deb was, still in the, you know, how do I say this? The freshest, the newest stages of making all of these adjustments, even though it's a constant process. And yet it sounds like you did all this with a tremendous amount of awareness of these choices you were making. It wasn't just like you stamped a foot down and said, "No, I'm not going to do this." I'm sure you were still doing plenty, and that you had some real clarity around what these choice points were, not just for you, but also for her and for your family in general, in terms of what you needed to do, and the fact that you had, several years where you were doing the sabbatical, the dad at home, and that you really had made a very conscious effort to go back into the workforce and the world of work, and there was something that you needed to get through there as well. And so it's really interesting to hear about this, because so many of us, in one way, shape, or form or another, have found ourselves trying to balance out or preserve a piece of ourselves at most when we're in some sort of caretaking role. And this wasn't just about caretaking, this was about really putting some important work into the world. It was important to Deb, it was important to you. And it wasn't just about her care, it was about getting the book out and getting the story out, and helping a lot of other people. So I really applaud you for saying, look, I just wasn't willing to leave this other work. It was also important that I was doing. I could also imagine that the people that you're helping through Stroke Onward, that many of them are also probably benefiting or could benefit from some of the work that you've done at self-help as well. Because I can imagine that people who've been through the kind of trauma that people have go through with a stroke are challenged financially and need different kinds of support and information to be able to move forward financially. And places like self-help can offer that kind of help and support as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And I think, it's not that we've connected the two. One thing I'll just comment on is
Yeah.
is kind of my clarity of decision making is a lot greater looking back on it than it necessarily felt when I was in it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it was real. And I think, in many ways, both the work Deb did as a professor,
Mm.
and the work I did at self-help very much informs how committed we are for the work of Stroke Onward to be
Yeah.
supportive of all people,
Yep.
regardless of their economic means. And that's
Yeah.
so hard. I mean, it's hard to use the word stroke survivor and privileged in the same sentence, but the reality is we've had a relatively privileged path through stroke recovery, good insurance, access to great health care, the personal skills to navigate the medical system, do research,
Mm.
et cetera. And that's just not true for most stroke survivors. So,
Right.
Stroke Onward has a very strong, and our new CEO at Stroke Onward is passionate about access to healthcare and health equity. And we want that lens to be front and center in all that Stroke Onward
Mm-hmm.
does,
Mm-hmm.
which is hard because very often when you're talking about new and innovative forms of support, they're going to be most easily accessible by the people with more resources, not less.
Well, and yet you got to keep plugging away at it. And when you do have a foundation under you and can afford to put the energy in, that's part of what's needed in order to move that agenda forward so that
Yep.
others can get what they need. I mean, it really one feeds the other in many, many ways. So, but yeah, it does feel like an uphill climb in many ways. But there's all kinds of good reasons to do it. And Stroke, from my impression, Stroke Onward has a huge educational, informational mission to inform people, not just people who've been devastated by strokes, but also all of their allies, all the people who care for them, and even people more on the periphery who may not be directly caring for them, but other people in their lives who maybe really don't understand what the challenges are in an ongoing way.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just a huge opportunity here to really inform people of what they can do and how they can be sensitive to and understanding of all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, we're going to take you on the road. You're going to be our PR firm.
Hey, sign me up. Now I'm curious. Now the book is coming out in we're you and I are speaking in October 2025. This episode may not will be coming out soon, but you're doing a second edition of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about why that second edition has become what has come about? Because yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking early on, I need to update the bio because the second edition is out. So came out a little less than 2 weeks ago.
Oh, it came
Um,
out. Okay.
yeah, so it is in the market. It's fortunately we got some good traction early on, heavily reviewed, available where all your best books are available,
Yeah.
and it's out both in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. We were because we work with so many people with aphasia, we
Right.
were unwilling to not update the audiobook. So it also came out same day on audio.
Wow.
And I think when the inventory of the first edition was starting to run low, we talked about doing a second printing, and our publisher asked us whether we thought we had learned enough over the course of 5 years
Mhm.
to make it worth writing a second edition. And candidly, at first I was like, no, I don't want to do that. It's it's too much work. It's too much stress. But we ultimately said, it is a really good idea. And most of the book is the same. We tweaked a little bit of the book, but the
Mhm.
main additions were a new preface to really
Mhm.
talk about our sense of what's changed in the 5 years since the first edition came
Mhm.
out.
Mhm.
And then we added two chapters at the end of the book.
Uh,
One to really highlight I think that the title of the chapter is 5 More Years of Living, Working, and Learning.
mhm.
And so we shared sort of some of the insights that we've had through the work at Stroke Onward and
Mhm.
our work as a couple continuing to evolve as a post-stroke couple.
Yeah.
Um, and then the final chapter is really about what we think needs to happen for the system to actually change in order to support people through the emotional journey of recovery and
Yeah.
what we sometimes refer to as the chronic phase of recovery. It's interesting that because stroke starts as a critical care intervention
Yeah.
and the focus is on rehab, it doesn't really get thought of in the medical community the
Right.
same way as other conditions that start off as chronic. And the other thing that makes stroke a little bit different is once a stroke survivor gets through the early medical challenges,
Mhm.
and once you get through the heavy rehabilitative phase, and usually insurance will only pay for that for 6 to 12 months, which is something we would love to try to see change because Deb's continued to do therapy for 15 years and continues to improve. The insurance companies have convinced the medical system that they don't need to pay for it after the first year. But many stroke survivors sort of lose their connection to the medical system because unlike things like MS or ALS or a lot of the more commonly known chronic conditions, most stroke survivors, unless they have something that's unrelated to the stroke itself, they don't
Yeah.
have medical needs that need them to stay tightly connected to the medical system. So they may
Mm,
see their GP, but they're not going back for treatment. So it's the system has kind of lets them go.
mm,
And that's one of the things that we hope to be able to kind of shed a spotlight on. And then, as we get a little bit stronger, influence policy to say the medical system needs to stay connected with stroke survivors longer to continue to provide this kind of
right.
emotional support
Right.
in recovery.
Right. And that's tied to physical support too. I can imagine that there's certain kinds of physical therapy or occupational therapy or certain types of interventions that really do make a difference in terms of somebody making progress.
Yeah, and like I said, Deb's still doing therapy, and I think that has multiple benefits. One is she's actually getting better,
Yeah.
maybe more slowly than she was early on, but still improving.
Mm-hmm.
But also continuing to work on your body
Mm-hmm.
creates hope, and
Right.
hope creates more stability on the
Yeah.
emotional side.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think we see great promise. There are a lot of new rehabilitative technologies
Mm,
that are not just good in the sense of they may help more people improve more,
mm,
but they're great in that they create places for people to work in ways that give them a mindset of
mm-hmm.
I can build a better life.
Yeah.
And that, we talk all the time that physical realm, it's like a Venn diagram, the physical realm and the emotional realm overlap.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
and and that's an important place to be.
So if people want to learn more about what you're doing at Stroke Onward or want to get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
And I'm guessing you have the ability to drop some things in the show notes, and I'm happy to
Yeah.
share a bunch of links. But
Yes.
our website is www.strokeonward, just the two words strung together, no spaces, no hyphens, .org.
Okay.
And that gets you to the homepage.
Okay.
My email address is steve@strokeonward.org. So if anybody wants to reach out directly, certainly happy to connect.
Great.
Um, and on the website, we've got links, and I can actually provide you with these
Yeah.
direct links as well to a few of our major initiatives. We're in soft launch for a major online community platform for stroke survivors, their families, and healthcare professionals interested in this emotional journey in
Yeah.
recovery
Yeah.
that we're calling Stroke Onward Community Circle, or
Nice.
SOCC for short, SOCC. There is, even though it's SOCC, not SOCK, we do have a section of the website called the sock drawer.
I
Um,
love that.
and then we're doing a lot of, again, a lot of our efforts are around building community,
Yep.
and we're doing local in-person events that we're calling regional collective impact gatherings.
Great.
And we have two different forms of gathering, one that's more geared toward medical professionals, and one that we're calling the stroke monologues, which is kind of like TEDx for
Yeah.
stroke.
Nice.
And we've done it 4 times and are actually in a couple weeks, we're holding two more performances in the Bay Area
Oh, wow.
of the stroke monologues.
Nice.
And I can give you links to all of that.
All right. Well, we'll make sure that those get into the show notes, and also I'll be sending all of that out via various forms of social and email. So definitely we will get the word out. Definitely.
Awesome.
So just to wrap up here, you've made a lot of very conscious choices throughout your career, and it continues. What would be a key piece of advice you would offer to somebody who is trying to decide what's next for them?
I mean, I guess maybe sort of blend two things together that we've talked about. One is this know your non-negotiables, as much as thinking about what you do want to do, what, people always say, find your passion. What do you really care about? And I think that's all passion. I always feel like puts a little too much pressure on it, but
I
what do you
agree.
really like? What do you really care about?
Yeah.
But similarly, what do you not want in your life right now?
Yeah.
Because I think that, looking for something new can be so overwhelming
Mm.
that if you can just eliminate some stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it just helps you narrow down the process.
Yeah.
And then, I know it sounds campy, but the whole now or not concept that
Yeah.
that it's so it can be so helpful to not think of a decision not to do something as permanent. You
Yep.
can always revisit that decision, but at any given point in time, it's kind of like, do you say, you know what, I'm not going to pursue that job?
Yeah.
And then do you spend all of your time thinking about, oh, shoot, maybe I
Yeah.
should have pursued that
Yeah.
job?
Yeah.
Rather say, okay, right now I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to do this and I'm not going to do that. And if you can
Right.
just live with that decision for a while,
Yeah.
again, it just saves so much mental anguish
Yeah.
and time.
Yeah.
So maybe, those two things together might be helpful.
Yeah. No, I think those are great. I appreciate it very much. And those tie in beautifully with a lot of the things I have written about in my book. A lot of people who've had to make some really tough decisions have looked at things similarly. So people always find it very useful to hear these things, even if they know them already, to hear them from somebody else. And especially when somebody has, had to, meet face to face with some difficult decision points, not just, the normal childhood you had and, all the privilege. And yet you've had some, real hurdles to deal with. So everyone has something. But
Yep,
for right
agreed.
now, I'm going to say thank you, Steve. This has been a joy and a privilege to speak with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It's really been fun, Tammy, and I'll talk to you offline more often than we have in the
I
last
hope
40 something
so.
years.
I'm going to hold you to it.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of my interview with Steve Zuckerman. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoolerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 285. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. Did you know that ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts can help this podcast reach more people? Please help me to inspire more people to move their careers in meaningful directions by clicking on the Apple Podcasts button and leave an honest rating and brief review. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out: Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career That Fulfills You. It's available through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. You can also help sustain the podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is acknowledged and appreciated. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.